welcome back to Biology with Mr. Brown. Today we will be jumping into our Unit 3, which deals with cell energy. As we talked about in class, in Unit 3, we will be focusing on how cells get energy to maintain their existence. So, how do they get the energy they need for their survival? To think about that, we have to start off small. So, in lesson one, we will be talking about cell transport and homeostasis. Cell transport meaning how do cells bring in the materials with how do cells get the materials and bring them into themselves to survive or release materials that they no longer need. And homeostasis, how do cells maintain the conditions that they need to support themselves? So without further ado, let's jump into Unit 3, Lesson 1 by making sure we have our guided note packets ready and something to write with. Let's get started. One of the many things that we started off today's class with was talking about the different organelles that make up a cell. And remember, organelles are these tiny structures within cells that help them carry out their functions. So they do things. So to get a full list of the organelles that we talked about, you can refer to the second page on your guided notes right after the intro page. But the ones that we're going to spend time talking about in this lesson are the cell membrane and the cell wall. So, what we need to know about these two is that all cells are going to have a cell membrane. And these cell membranes protect the cell from all outside things. So, in order to get into the cell, you have to go through the cell membrane. And it's semi permeable, meaning that it allows some things in and it keeps some things out. All right. And this cell membrane is made up of proteins, lipids, which are fats, and sugars. All right. Our other structure that we need to talk about is called the cell wall. And not everything has a cell wall. Specific organisms that have cell walls include plants, fungi, and some bacteria. And that's because they need extra support. So a cell wall is going to provide extra support around the cell membrane. So one of the things that we're going to come to see is like in plants have a cell wall in addition to their cell membrane because they need that extra support to help them keep their structure. So, in order for cells to get the necessary materials they need to create energy, they first have to be able to move things across the cell membrane. And one way in which they are capable of moving things across the cell membrane is through passive transport. Now, when you hear the word passive, I want you to think it's easy, it's lax, it's passive, it's not aggressive. And the reason why is because we are moving things from an area of high concentration to low concentration. All right. So if you look at the image that is on your screen right now, this is symbolizing passive transport. We have particles that are at a high concentration and they are going to move to a low concentration, an area of low concentration across the cell membrane until they reach what we call equilibrium. I want you to think of the word equal when you hear equilibrium. They want to be equal on both sides of the cell membrane. And what's important about passive transport is that no energy is required for passive transport to happen because particles naturally want to move from an area of high concentration to low concentration. They want to move that way. There are two types of passive transport that we need to talk about. The first type of passive transport is called diffusion. And like I said, passive transport is moving from high to low. And so when we have diffusion, this could be gas particles, it could be liquid particles. And what we are going to see is that those particles are going to move from areas where they are great at to areas where there are not so many of them at. And so there's a type of diffusion that specifically relates to water, and that is called osmosis. I want you to put an asterisk by that or a star by that in your notes. Whenever water is involved, it's going to more than likely be osmosis. So the diffusion of water moving from an area of high concentration to low concentration, is called osmosis. Facilitated diffusion is another type of diffusion or another type of passive transport. And I need you to think of the word facilitated. When something facilitates, it helps it. So this is diffusion that needs help. And what is going to help the particles move across the membrane is a protein. The particles are still moving from an area of high concentration to lower concentration. They just need the assistance of a protein, more than likely because the particle is too big to get across by itself. So it just needs some help. But this still requires no energy. Since we are talking about particles moving across the cell membrane, it's important that we take a moment to mention or talk about tonicity. And tonicity has to deal with solutions, so we need to know what solutions are. And a solution is simply two or more substances that have been mixed evenly within a liquid. So, pretty much when we dissolve things to the point we can no longer see them within a liquid. And in this class, our liquid will always be water. In chemistry, later on next year, you will learn that you can dissolve things in other substances. But for biology, our substance that we will always dissolve things in will be water. And when it comes to solutions, there are two parts to solutions. We have the solute, which is what is being dissolved. The solute is what we are dissolving. So that can be salt, that could be sugar. Are those like flavor packets that you like to put in your water? Those are solutes, what we are trying to dissolve. The solvent is what is doing the dissolving. So when you put the flavor packet into the water, you're using water, which is the solvent, to dissolve that flavor packet. When you mix salt and water, you use water to dissolve the salt particles. So as you can see here in this image, the solute is dissolved in the water, which is the solvent. So back to tonicity. Tonicity is going to refer to the relative concentration of the solution. All right. And that is going to determine how much diffusion can take place. All right. Or osmosis when we're talking about water. So there are some conditions when it comes to tonicity, meaning there's different types of tonic tonicity environments that can occur. So let's take some time to learn about the different types of tonicity. The first type is hypertonic. Hyper. All right. And this is when the solution contains a higher concentration of particles. So water moves outside of the cell. So what is happening in this situation is that there are more solute particles on the outside of the cell and a lot of water on the inside of the cell. So water is going to move out of the cell. And if water moves outside of the cell will shrivel up, as we can see right here. All right. And I want you to take a note of that bottom picture, the one with the square around it. That is representing a plant cell. And that square that you see around it is the cell wall. Plants have cell walls because they need that extra support to maintain their structure. All right. And plants are always bringing water in and out of their cells. So they need that cell wall to maintain their appearance. Another example is if we look right here, we have more water molecules on the inside of our cell and a higher concentration of solute particles on the outside of our cell. Remember, through diffusion, things want to go from a high concentration to a lower concentration. And so we're always going to be talking about it in the sense of water right here. So, since water wants to move from a high concentration to a lower concentration, water will move outside of the cell, which will cause the cell to lose its volume. It will shrink, it will shrivel up. The next type of tonicity is hypotonic. Hypotonic is when the outside solution is at a lower concentration, so the particles of water move inside the cell. So water is going to move inside of the cell. So that means our water is high on the outside. The particles or the solute is going to be higher on the inside. Okay. So if we look at this image right here, we have a bunch of water on the outside of the cell. The solute is high on the inside of the cell. Water is going to want to move from an area of high concentration to where it is low at. It is lower inside of the cell. So if all that water moves inside of the cell, we will create a hypotonic cell. And notice what can happen here if we look at it. The cell will begin to swell. It will begin to get big. All right. And if it gets too big to the point where it can't hold it, and animal cells like ours, they can burst. And plant cells, they have more protection due to their cell wall. So their cell wall will kind of squish that expanding cell so it can kind of keep its shape. The last type of tonic environment for us to study or look at is isotonic. Iso means the same. All right. So this is when water moves into and out of the cell to maintain the perfect balance. So these are what we would see in an ideal situation. The same amount of water molecules on the outside of the cell matches the water molecules on the inside of the cell. And the same goes for the solute particles. And when they want to exchange themselves, one solute particle will transfer, one water particle will come in. So we see that on this slide. In the isotonic environment, we have the same amount of water on the inside of the cell and the same amount of solute particles on the inside and outside of the cell as well. And so if there was going to be any osmosis going on, what will happen is that as one solute or sodium chloride particle comes across, then one water molecule would come in, and they would keep on exchanging each other that way. So on this slide, what you will see is the three types of tonicities that can exist for a cell: hypertonic, isotonic, and hypotonic, and the different ways in which they can affect the cell. Hypertonic causes water to come out of the cell due to it trying to balance out with the solute that is on the outside. Isotonic, that's where they are equally coming in. And hypotonic is when water comes into the cell. So let's do some quick practice with what we have learned. And so what we want to do is go through and see how they both affect the animal cell and a plant cell. So hypertonic, what is happening is the cell will shrink. Both in the animal and plant cells will shrink because there is more water on the inside of the cell than there is on the outside of the cell. So water will travel out. H2O moves out. And you want to make note of why it is shrinking, because water is moving out. Isotonic. Iso means the same. The word iso means the same. So they are staying the same. Okay. Hypo, what I think of when I think hypo is hippo. I think of a hippo. So things are going to get big. And the only way things are going to get big is if they swell up. Okay. And the reason they are swelling is because water is coming into the cell. H2O is coming into the cell. All right. The main things that we need to know about this is that animal cells are less protected against tonicity changes because we don't have a cell wall. All right. Plant cells have that extra layer of protection. All right. They have cell walls. So, in case they lose structure of their cells, there's something extra there to help protect them. Let's do some more practice problems with tonicity. So, on this page in your guided notes, you're tasked with identifying whether each of these squares is depicting an isotonic, hypertonic, or hypotonic environment. And what you will have to do is draw arrows to show the direction water is going to move, and then say whether the cell will shrink, stay the same, or swell because of the way water is moving. To complete this, we have some helpful keys. They tell us what water looks like, and they also tell us what the solute looks like. We will work through the first one together. So what we are first going to do is count up the number of solute particles. And so if we count up the number of particles inside the cell, we see 4. If we count the number of solute particles on the outside, we will see 2. All right? So we always want to think about these problems in terms of the water. What is going to happen with the water? And remember, diffusion is when particles move from a great concentration or higher concentration to lower concentration. Osmosis deals with water. So if water was to move from a higher concentration to lower concentration, the water particles are greater on the outside. So water is going to start to move in. So that's how we draw our arrows are representing the water moving in. And I'm not going to put it on the slide, but if water moves into this cell, what will happen? If all of that water moves into that cell, it will swell. All right. That cell will swell. So please make sure you write swell on the cell. All right. Please make sure you also come with the other 2 models done in class. So we finished talking about passive transport, the transport across the cell membrane that does not require energy, and it moves, particles are moving from high to low. But what if particles decided they wanted to go from low to high? That is what we call active transport. When particles go from an area of low concentration to higher concentration, it is referred to as active transport. And they are in order to do this, they have to move against the natural flow. So naturally, particles want to go from high to low. All right. But in active transport, they are moving in reverse. They're going from low to high, and this is going to require some energy. So the 2 types of ways in which we can accomplish this are through number 1, the use of protein pumps. Now, proteins are going to be embedded into the cell membrane. So if you look at the image that's on your screen, we have this proton pump, which is a protein. And its job is to push or to pump ions across the cell membrane. So if you are looking, the ion that we are looking at is hydrogen, and it's going to take that hydrogen and move it from an area of low concentration to that area of high concentration where all the other hydrogens are. And that requires energy. And you can see that energy, which is ATP. ATP is what is energy in the cell. Another type of active transport is called bulk transport. Whenever you hear the word bulk, I want you to think of a lot of stuff. All right. So, bulk transport is using membrane bound vesicles to help transport materials inside and out of the cell. All right. By fusing with the cell membrane. So, vesicles help fuse with the cell membrane to move things in and out of the cell. So there's 2 types. The first type is exo. endocytosis. Exo, I want you to think of the word exit. So these are when vesicles are moving things out of the cell. They are exiting out. Endocytosis is the moving of things inside of the cell. So this is when the cell is going to pinch things to bring them in. And so you have some images on the right hand side of your screen to help you understand that. On the left hand side of that image, you see exocytosis. The vesicle is moving stuff from the inside of the cell and going to release it to the out. And in endocytosis, the vesicle almost pinches in on itself and brings the materials even further inside of the cell. So on this slide, what you will see is a replication of what you're going to have to do in your notes. So what you need to do on this side is think about how all of the words from your word bank, active transport, passive transport, diffusion, and facilitated diffusion are all going to fit in here. Think active transport requires energy. Passive transport does not require energy and shows things moving from an area of high to low. And then there's two types. All right. So see if you can fill that out and we'll go over the right answers in class. So the end result of all of this is homeostasis. So the main reason why cells undergo passive and active transport is to help them maintain balance within their cells. So they're moving things constantly across their cell membranes so that they can maintain balance. All right. So the tissues and organs that these cells make up, they can work at their optimal level. All right. And that's all homeostasis is, the state of steady internal physical and chemical conditions maintained by living systems. And so we do this on a bigger scale. Think about it. When we get hot, our bodies start to cool us down through sweat. All right. When we are cold, we shiver so that our bodies can build up heat. Shivering is the contraction of muscles in order to warm yourself up. All right. Our cells also do this by regulating water levels, maintaining calcium levels, maintaining a healthy blood pressure. So all of these help our cells stay in homeostasis. So, in the end, what I need you to do as we wrap up our lesson together, I need you to complete all the practice activities within your guided note packet. And as uh, a real quick final, let's think about exocytosis, diffusion, and all of these things, and whether they are going to require energy or not. So, exocytosis, as we said, is a form of bulk transport. Bulk transport falls under active transport, which needs energy. Diffusion, if we think about that, is going from high to low. It is a form of passive, it does not need. If we look at that image right there for number 3, we see things moving from an area of high concentration to low concentration. So we know that's not going to need energy as well. Active transport, we know, needs energy. Okay. And so I want you to keep going from that. Please make sure you have this filled in. And if there are any questions, please get in contact with your biology teacher, and we look forward to seeing you during our next class period. Have an awesome time studying. We look forward to it.